Welcome back for Journeys with Jeff. We're going to continue our conversation with attorney Dyke Spear tonight. And he's, as I said before, he is a field investigator for the Mutual UFO Network. He has had a lot of experiences and done a lot of research on UFOs. And we're going to continue our discussion with him. We left off last time with attorney Spear talking about the abduction of Travis Walton, you might remember from last time. And attorney Spear, we just want to finish that up with, they made a movie out of it. And
yeah, he wrote a book called Fire in the Sky, which tells the story of the abduction, and he subsequently sold the rights to Paramount Theaters, and they made the movie Fire in the Sky. It was very successful.
Can you sum up very quickly what his experience was? I mean, was he experimented on? Was he communicated with?
He believes that it was not an abduction. He believes that it was really a rescue mission, because they picked him up and he dropped 15 feet and they heard him. He was 5 days in the craft, and there's only a few hours that he has any recollection of. He was basically blacked out through the time until they dropped him off. Now, I was fortunate enough to have both lunch and dinner with him on several occasions, and I asked him. I said, "You know, Travis, you look terrific." And I said, "It's my understanding of the phenomena that when people have been taken by the extraterrestrials, that subsequently their health is much better than prior to being taken. Is that true of you?" And he looked at me real hard and said, "I don't want to talk about that." And he got up. We happened to be in a hometown buffet in a city in Pennsylvania, and he got up to get a cup of coffee. And he came back a couple minutes later, and he's sliding into the booth, and he looked at me, and he said, "I'll tell you this, Dyke, since the incident happened, I haven't been sick one day of my life."
And that was how many years?
Oh, over 45.
45 years? And he has not been sick?
The thing, the incident took place in 1974, 1975. I then, the following day, I think we had dinner, and just on a whim, I asked him, I said, "You know, Travis, it's my understanding of the phenomena, whenever you've been abducted or taken, whatever, that these are not one-shot deals, that it happens periodically. Anything happened to you subsequently?" He looked at me real hard for a long time, and he said, "I'm not going to answer that question." Now, as an attorney, I'll tell you that's a yes. I mean, because all I had to do was say no, but he didn't. Obviously, he didn't want to lie, so he just.
Why do you suppose he didn't answer the question?
I'm sorry?
Why do you suppose he didn't answer the question?
I don't think he wants to go on the record with that. So.
Wow. Okay. Well, we were talking just before about, I think you had said that your research tells you that the polls that have been taken, 51% of 54% are more open to the
54%, according to the Gallup poll, believe we're being visited by extraterrestrials of America.
So that's a paradigm shift, in your words.
Well,
the
paradigm shift really came from December 17 of 2017, just under 2 years ago, when on the front page of the Sunday New York Times, they broke the story that the Defense Department had been investigating the UFO phenomena. Now, for 70 years, the government had taken the position that we have no interest in it. We don't investigate it. It's not important. So basically, they lied to us. They have been investigating it, and I'm glad. The problem is they don't have a great deal of desire to share what they've learned with us. But we're figuring out with MUFON anyway, so it's, in the long run, it probably won't make any difference.
Well, if they haven't been forthcoming with a lot of their information and what they've discovered, what is it that you think has really attributed to this paradigm shift? Why do more people believe? Because it came from the New York Times?
Yes,
credible sources?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, there was a investigative reporter in Las Vegas who actually had the story and decided he was not going to break it himself because he had found out the New York Times was looking at it, and he knew that if the Times broke it, it would really mean something. When the Times broke it, the Washington Post picked it up, the LA Times, the Chicago Tribune. It became a media phenomenon, and it still is. I mean, now we've the series that's on the concluded on the History Channel about the Navy pilots that saw the UFOs flying off of the Nimitz aircraft carrier in 2004 and in 2015 off the East Coast. I mean, all of this is getting people very interested. Jan Hartson, who is the CEO, if you will, of MUFON rather, told us at the International Symposium in July that he's never seen anything like it. I mean, he said we used to sometimes have to really beg people to come to press conferences. Now they're breaking down the doors, and they're constantly looking for people to interview.
Everybody has heard about Area 51. That seems to be the, Area 51. Can you tell us a little bit about what Area 51 is?
Well, Area 51, developed the stealth bomber. It developed the SR-71, which is the reconnaissance plane, and supposedly there are artifacts there and things. There's actually more going on in what's known as Area 52, which is in Utah, and nobody can get near that place. It's huge. It's absolutely huge. But you might want to get into some of the personalities that I'm aware of that have had some experiences.
Okay, well, let's talk about that. I think I mentioned Eartha Kitt before, and can you
well, yeah,
let
me tell you a little story about her. I produced a show in Chicago, 1995, called Lady Day at Emerson's Bar and Grill. It's a very popular show with regional theaters. Hartford Stage has done it, Theater Works has done it. And the reason is there's only two people in it. You have a singer-actress and who portrays Billie Holiday, and your piano player. So that keeps your expenses down rather dramatically. And so I put together a production for a 6-week run in Chicago, and it went very well. Eartha was a very moody person. One day you couldn't shut her up, and another day she would be very, very silent, wouldn't say a word. And I would fly out every week and check on business, and I always took Eartha to lunch. And to make sure it wasn't awkward, I had hired a woman by the name of Cheryl to do PR in Chicago. and I'd invite her to the lunch. And so one day, Eartha's in one of her moods, and Cheryl and I are talking, and Jordan and the Chicago Bulls are going for another NBA championship, and we're talking about that. And then we drifted into UFOs. And after that conversation kind of petered out, Eartha lifted up her head and said, I was playing a show in LA, and they had me in a high-rise luxury hotel. The middle of the night, I sat up in the bed, and there were a whole bunch of little guys standing around the bed. Now, I didn't want to break her train of thought, so I didn't question her about that. But I assumed she was talking about the little grays that we know about. And she said, we sort of looked at each other for a while, minute, and suddenly they just disappeared. So there was nothing to do except fall back on the pillow and go to sleep. Got up the next day. Now, Eartha had a daughter, extraordinarily attractive and very smart woman by the name of Kitt Shapiro. Eartha had been married to a Jewish accountant by the name of Shapiro. And so noon in LA, 9 o'clock in New York, she calls her daughter and tells her the story. After Eartha finishes, the daughter says, Mom, I got to tell you something. Last night, the identical thing happened to me. Now, I've told this story in my various lectures around North America, and I tell it simply to explain that this phenomenon is not something about great technology going from point A to point B. It has layers and layers of strangeness that I don't think we're ever going to be able to penetrate. I mean, it's just the way it is.
And so that's another anecdote from another person, famous person. I was going to ask you, I forget who it was. It was a president. Was it Carter? Wasn't there a president who said that there was something in the White House lawn or somewhere?
I'm not familiar with that.
Jimmy Carter or somebody
Jimmy
saw it?
Jimmy Carter saw a UFO when he was he was campaigning for governor of Georgia, and he subsequently saw one when he was riding as governor. He was riding around in the Georgia plane, the official Georgia plane, and when he campaigned and said that if he ever won the presidency, he was going to have full disclosure, but he didn't.
Yeah.
He didn't.
Do you think that some of these, the presidents that are sitting on stuff that they just can't?
Absolutely.
Jackie Gleason.
Yes.
Talk to me about him.
Jackie Gleason and Richard Nixon were absolute bosom buddies. And they played a lot of golf together in Florida. One day they're having a round, and Gleason, of course, was fascinated with the paranormal and with UFOs. Probably slightly more the paranormal, simply because he had a library of 1,700 volumes on the paranormal, which he bequeathed to the psychology department of Duke University when he died.
Jackie Gleason did?
Yes.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, they're having this round of golf, and Gleason is just bugging Nixon to tell him about UFOs. And Nixon is blowing him off and blowing him off. You don't have a security clearance. You don't have this. Blah, 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 blah. Finally, at the end of the round, Nixon says to him, "What are you doing at 8 o'clock tonight?" Gleason said, "Well, nothing." He said, "Make yourself available." Gleason has no idea what's going to happen. 8 o'clock, Nixon shows up, driving his own vehicle, Secret Service presumptively trailing behind, says, "Get in the car." They go about 25 minutes to Homestead Air Force Base. Nixon takes Gleason into this building. They drop down 3 flights in this building. And it's a huge open space full of wreckage. But over against the wall, there were translucent vats filled probably with something like formaldehyde. And there were creatures floating in these vats. Gleason saw this stuff and was so distraught when he got back to his home in Florida. According to his wife, he did not leave the home for 3 weeks. Now, how do we know this? When Gleason died, his wife wrote a memoriam, and this story is a chapter in the memoriam. Well, as an attorney, I can tell you, it's an interesting story, but it's not evidentiary because if we learned anything from the Kavanaugh hearings last year, you need corroboration. So who can corroborate? Well, a guy named Bill Burns, who was one of the UFO hunters on cable TV, who has written books, who is a PhD graduate from MIT, also has a law degree, probably the ultimate Renaissance man. If I could have dinner with anybody tomorrow night, it would be with Bill Burns, okay? So I was at a symposium a few years ago where they had speakers up on all on stage, which you could question. So I asked the question about we know the Jack Gleason Nixon story. Does anybody have any corroboration? And Bill Burns jumped up and said, yeah, I can answer that. He said, I was the screen editor on the last movie Jackie Gleason made before he died, called Nothing in Common. And the co-star was Tom Hanks. He said, Tom Hanks and I are friendly. I don't know Gleason. And Tom Hanks came over because he knew of my involvement with UFOs and told me this story that Gleason had told him. And allegedly, Gleason didn't tell anybody in Hollywood except Shirley MacLaine, which makes some sense because apparently she picks up a lot of stuff because she keeps her mouth shut. So now we got a little bit of corroboration. And a couple years back, I did a lecture for First Night in Hartford. And after it was finished, I'm taking some questions. And a woman raises her hand and says, I don't have a question, but I have a comment. I worked for many years at the Institute for Living. And Jackie Gleason was a patient there. He told us all that story. So that's pretty good corroboration that this all happened.
Wow, wow. Any other people of note that you've talked to, or?
Well, I don't know if they're actually of note. There was a young man in Hartford that a lot of people knew, by the name of John Chapman, and he had a restaurant called Shenanigans downtown Hartford. It was a dining car inside an office building. It's very popular at the time. And my office used to be very close to it, and I'd go over and have lunch and breakfast sometimes. And John knew of my interest, and he came over one slow day, and we sat at the table, we were talking. And he told me that when he was in high school, in a suburb of Detroit, he had I think he was in a play, and he didn't get out of the school, out of that event, a rehearsal or something, till about 10 o'clock that night. And there was a golf course directly between his house and the high school. They were forbidden to trespass on the golf course. That was pain of death. But to walk around it to his house, it was 3 miles. Cut across it, it was little less than a mile. And he said, screw it, I'm sneaking across the golf course. He said, I came upon a little rise, and there was a gully, and I looked down, and there was a machine down there. And there were sparks sort of coming out of the machine. And he said, I was stunned. I looked at it, and suddenly it took off. Just shot right up into the sky. He said, I was 17 years old. I'd never seen anything like that, but I knew it wasn't one of ours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
There's one other guy I might be able to talk about very briefly.
Sure.
Unfortunately, a guy named Robert Dean, unfortunately, he passed away a year ago. But Robert Dean was a career Army guy. He was the liaison in Vietnam between the CIA and the Montaguards, which we hired as mercenaries to go out and kill the VC. He was also assigned some years to NATO outside of Brussels. And he said there was a bunker there, many stories into the ground, and you'd be down there for a 24-hour shift, and he said it would absolutely drive you nuts because there was nothing to do. Place was full of TV and computer screens, and 90 miles to the east, the Russians had the identical setup. And for 45 years, we looked at each other and never, thank God, never fired a shot in anger. But he said, I was down there one day going nuts, and the colonel came over and said, I got something to perk you up, Dean. I went over to the safe and took out a document entitled the 1964 NATO Assessment of the UFO Phenomena. And he said there were several conclusions to it. Number one, they're here. Number two, they've been here for thousands of years. Number three, they probably do not represent any threat to us because they're so far ahead of us they could take us out in a day and a half. And number four was we are being visited by 4 separate and distinct extraterrestrial races, one of which looks exactly like us, which freaked out the intelligence community.
Now, this is in a 1964 NATO report?
Yes. Yes.
Now, if I wanted to, just Jeff Grandy, if I wanted to peruse that report, look that report up, is it available to be?
I'm sure it isn't. The colonel had it in a safe, and after Dean perused it, it went back into the safe. That was, I'm sure it's highly classified.
But I couldn't go on the internet and
You
Google
can try.
1964 NATO report on UFOs?
It's a secret military document.
Wow. Well, there's a lot to think about, I tell you. I wanted a couple of questions. We were out of time, Dyke, but I wanted to just, is there one book that you would recommend that you could think of all the books there are out there? Is there one book that you might recommend to the viewers to that they could start off with, really learning a lot of stuff?
Well, I wish you'd told me you're going to ask me that. I'd think about it. I like David Jacobs' book. He's a retired professor from Temple University, full professor. And he wrote a book entitled Aliens Among Us, which discusses, he has researched over 1,000 different people who all tell the same story, that there are aliens, they look like us, and they are slowly coming into our population.
Last thing, if any viewer would like to, have any questions or would like to contact you, do you have a website or an email or a contact where they can get a hold of you? And
well, the only contact, if anybody is interested in a lecture, they can contact me at dykespear@comcast.net.
okay, so that's DYKESPEAR, all one word, at
Comcast.net.
Comcast.net.
.net.
Okay, well, very good. Well, thank you very much. That was very interesting, and we thank you for your visit. This is Jeff Grandy again. Thanks for joining Journeys with Jeff, and we'll see you next time. Take care.